Good afternoon, everyone. It's September 28th, and I want to share something, a message God gave me this morning, September 28th. I was reading, he pointed me to read Nehemiah. And as I started reading it, I realized how prophetically connected it is to what's going on with the wealth transfer and what will be happening afterwards. Firstly, we may feel, and many of us do, look at our certain situations. Like Nehemiah looked at the city and said, "It's destroyed. The walls are burnt. I mean, they're crumbled, and the gates are burned." And he felt so overwhelmed by that, and like this is an impossible thing. And but I love what he did with it. He took it to God, and he fasted, and he prayed. And when he did this, it opened a doorway for God to work through him. And he was here before the king, the cupbearer, and it was something that he could have lost his job for even talking about, because it wasn't even in the king's interest to rebuild this new city. But he stepped out in faith. Um, and I love that it actually says he prayed before he answered the king. And it's like that instantaneous prayer of like, whoa, this is a serious situation. I need God's direction on this. And I love that stance that he was going to pray in that moment. I don't know how long that prayer was. Maybe it was very short, but it was just like, God be with me. I can imagine. But when he took that, like, if he looked at it from the natural man's eyes, it would have seemed like a crazy thing for him to even mention it, because the king himself could have, like, why would he provide any funding for? How could he even help this situation? Like, in the natural, it made no sense. But God intervened, as we know, and this unlikely this king became the provision to rebuild the city and the walls and the gates. And so like that was wonderful, right? Like he had this breakthrough, he stepped in faith and he had a breakthrough. But even at that point, he had the provision now. Like after the wealth transfer happens, like you'll have the provision, but it doesn't mean that it will be all built. We could still look at it and say, "Whoa, now what?" But they went out and yeah, a group of people went with him to help. And as they were working it says from sunrise to like sunset, I think. Like they were really putting in this effort, and that is going to be required, like that we put in the effort after the provision is given to do this. And then as they were building, like the enemy came against it. And we can be sure, like the enemy's coming against these things now. We know, we feel it, and he will come against it later too. So they realized they had to be ready with their swords and their shields. They had to be working on one hand, but they had to also be armor and battle ready. And this is required. Like in our spirit, this is all spiritual, of course. We need to be working spiritually to be battle ready because we will face things. Um, and then there came this issue where there wasn't enough provision for the poor in the kingdom. And these are just other Jews, and the rich Jews were sort of lording over the poor brothers and sisters, and they were all trying to build. And they're like, well, we don't even have money to feed ourselves. And so what Nehemiah asked then is the rich people to say, hey, you guys got to share your wealth. And so they did obediently do that. And I believe this is true too. Like, not everyone will necessarily be a part of the wealth transfer, but there will be many that are still trying to build a kingdom with us. And we need to be very, very free-handed in giving to those that God asks us to give to when that happens. And to redistribute amongst the church itself so that the fullness of this wealth transfer can be enjoyed and that the kingdom can be built by everyone. And erasing obviously the debts of those that are working with us. And then lastly, I love what Nehemiah, or maybe a couple more things. Nehemiah was feeding 150 people daily, he said, and he didn't require anything of them. And he didn't require anything from anyone else, even in the whole kingdom, to be giving him anything to help him. Like he was completely doing that of his own ability. I'm not sure where he was getting the funding for it. Maybe it was from the king, but it's just so awesome, like that we want to be focusing on one thing and one thing, uni-focused, so that these things can occur. Um, so I encourage everyone to read this book. I just sort of glossed the surface of the things that I enjoyed this morning. There's much more in there, but I pray also that everyone listening would have the wisdom to understand that even one person who is submitted can change the course of the kingdom. Because this Nehemiah, he was on his heart to do one thing for God. And as a result of him submitting himself completely and risking everything, God was able to change the whole kingdom as a result because he obeyed and walked in faith. They took up his armor and he was ready to fight. And like it says the scripture in a scripture, it says, "Who has despised the day of small things?" Like, so start with fasting and praying. Maybe your situation looks just as barren as many of us feel. But just start there and dedicating yourself to the Lord completely and letting him give you that increase in multiplication and direction and following it. So anyway, I appreciated this thought this morning. Hope that helped everyone.